planning, and setting up a community, how it wants to grow, how it wants to develop economically, and parks and recreation, libraries. The list is really endless, and a lot of people say, well, isn't township government and county government similar? Really, we're not. We're both local governments, but we perform very different functions.
Is that right?
The primary responsibility of counties is sheriffs, the county jail, community health, mental health.
Okay.
Those are all functions that townships have no role in. We do not get into those services.
So county government does nothing with like ambulances or
Correct.
fire departments or anything
Correct.
like that?
Exactly. Fire
Okay.
department, emergency services are township driven. Sometimes you might see 2 townships or maybe 3 combined services to do a joint operation, but you don't see the county get into that. Just like running elections, it's our clerks that do that, or assessing property, that's the local assessor. Property tax bills come from the township, even though we're collecting taxes on behalf of the schools, the counties, the libraries, or any other maybe regional authority that has to collect a millage. But it's just simply because the townships, that's our role. And the role of our treasurer is to collect those taxes. And so the functions are very different, and sometimes that's not easily seen.
I didn't know that in particular. How were they defined, those roles?
Largely by state law.
Okay.
We follow, in township government, there are 2 main acts that outline our primary authorities, and it's the General Law Township Act or the Charter Township Act. And a township, and there's another difference here in local government, which is pretty interesting, between a city or a village and a township. And the differences there are, cities have charters. They actually are allowed to essentially establish any kind of law they want, or local ordinance, without state interference, unless the state has adopted a law saying they cannot do that. Township government is more limited. We tend to be limited by nature, and a lot of people like it that way. And the idea behind township government is that we can only do services and do local laws and ordinances that are allowed specifically in state statute. So that's the difference between a city and a township government, and that's why you tend to see a little bit more government inside a city, more ordinances, sometimes more services. But really a township tends to grow with its needs. If there's a need for sewer and water, parks and rec, those types of things tend to grow with a township, and a township has the tools to really do those types of functions as well.
Now, sometimes we hear charter township. What is a charter township?
Charter townships tend to be larger. First of all, you have to be 3,000 in population.
Okay.
And that's an interesting topic too, because a lot of people formed charters and they follow the charter township law, which has a few more requirements for them. They have to do a little bit more on their finance reporting to the state. But one of the primary things for people forming a charter township was to gain some protection from annexation and the ability for other, like a nearby city, to take some of the township land to bring it in.
Oh.
That was one of the primary responsibilities of the Charter Township Act. Unfortunately, the way things have gone, some lawsuits and just changes over the year, there's actually, some would feel, and I would argue, that charter townships are almost more vulnerable to annexations now because of how that process works in the Charter Township law. So that is an unfortunate case, but charter townships tend to be bigger, offer a little bit more services. They have a little bit more taxing authority too when it comes to millage rates. A general law township has 1 mill cap, a very small amount of taxing authority for township operations, and for charter township it's higher.
Now, does the citizens that reside in the township vote for that millage, or is that something in statute?
Millages are all voted on.
Okay.
Yes, they all have to still be voted on by the people. It's just the amount that could be charged to begin with.
Okay, and the amount that they collect from that mill, they obviously use that to pay the supervisor, clerk, if they decide to pay them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe you can walk us through some of that.
Yeah, and a lot of times we have a number of townships out there that really aren't even charging a mill. They might be able to simply, from what they collect through the regular tax rate, be able to, for their general fund, to be able to pay for maybe the salary and wages of their 5 officers. And there are some townships that have 7.
Yeah.
You can have a board with 7. It's either 5 or 7. So part of it may go for that. Usually, though, when you see a dedicated millage, it's generally for something specific. Maybe they need to put in a new township hall. Maybe there's a new fire truck that needs to be purchased, a new ambulance, a new park, playground equipment for parks. Maybe it's a library millage for the township library. So usually those things are dedicated. One of the things that doesn't get voted on, though, is a special assessment. And special assessments are usually structured so that the benefit has to be derived directly by the people that the collection is coming from. So in other words, if there's a street lighting campaign to put up street lights, maybe in a neighborhood, those can be set up with input from the citizens who come to the township meetings, but it can be done without a vote. It just has to be a series of hearings that take place.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there could be 5 officers or 7.
Yes.
Can you walk us through why the 5 or 7, and then what are the roles? Why do we have so many people in township government?
Sure. Really, the functions, there's 3 primary functions and officers, if you will, in each township, and that is the clerk, the treasurer, and the supervisor. The supervisor is kind of seen as the figurative head of the township, and really the supervisor oversees kind of the township as a whole. Clerks have specific requirements in statute that they have to do, and that is administering elections, registering people to vote, maintaining the qualified voter file. They also are the repository for any correspondence or any correspondence that goes out or comes into the township, whether it be in the form of an ordinance that gets adopted or any kind of communication. So the clerk really has a significant responsibility. Treasurer as well. The treasurer's duties are outlined in statute by state law, and that is they have fiduciary responsibility. They are the sole person that's responsible for the funding for the township, making sure that the township records are accurate with the banks, making sure that the reporting goes to the state on time and with accurate detail. So they have a very big responsibility as well, signing all those F-65 reports that go to the state, so the state can track and make sure that everything is okay. The other positions in the township are trustees. Most townships have a board of 5, so they have the 3 primary elected officials and then 2 trustees. Some do have 7. If you're a charter township, you can go up to 7. You don't necessarily have to, but you may go up to 7. And you would just be adding 2 trustees to that board then. So there'd be 4 trustees instead of 2.
And what do the trustees do?
Trustees are sort of that extra vote on the board. And they are, and generally trustees they're not full-time. They're usually paid per diem per meetings. They tend to be able to give more input. A trustee is helpful when maybe they're the liaison to like a local planning commission that's going to look into something like that, or maybe just some townships have their own road committee to figure out if they're going to spend money on roads in a certain year. They may be the person to sit on that board. So they really help. I'd almost call them liaisons to help that communication at the township level.
Now, why are some townships are open full time and some
service.
and some are part time? Why would that happen?
Yeah, and that's a good question. A lot of townships simply want to have limited authority, limited government. And generally those are smaller rural townships that don't have maybe sewer and water, don't have a lot of ordinances, regulations in place. And even then, most of the full board in a situation like that would be part-time. But as a community tends to grow, as a township grows, there generally tends to be more pressure and more need for more services. That sometimes can bring in full-service sewer, water lines. It may bring in a full parks and recreation department where you're offering soccer and t-ball and baseball for the community. Maybe you have a full-fledged parks department where you have maintenance, a lot of maintenance needs that go on with some of those functions. And that may cause some of those officials to turn into more full-time, like maybe your supervisor becomes full-time because the demands are greater. That tends to grow with population and demands of services.